Bonjour, good morning everyone. We've still got one or two folks arriving. I know one or two other sessions are running late, so I'm going to make a kind of a slow start to allow for other colleagues to join us. But welcome, thank you very much for coming to this session. My name is Jim Easton. I'm the National Director for Transformation for the NHS in England. As you may know, the English NHS is facing an extraordinary challenge of trying to sustain its journey of quality whilst also tackling a big financial problem. And my job particularly involves trying to find £20 billion worth of efficiency savings whilst improving quality. And I'm going to talk about what we're trying to do to make that happen. But really the main message is not so much the detail of that for England, but the way in which, because of that problem, we're trying to accelerate our journey of quality improvement, to try and drive quality improvement from being a typical experience of many, many individual examples of good improvement programs or good results, to trying to drive the spread and adoption of that change across our system. And so I hope that the learning that we're going through is relevant whether you're trying to run a country or a region or a hospital or a department. Certainly our reflection is that the way in which we're trying to think about driving improvement in a more focused way is relevant to every level of the system. It's a pleasure to welcome you from across the world. It's a pleasure to have some colleagues from England in the room. They're suffering my presence directly in their day-to-day lives, so I'm sure they'll be able to make some comment in questions about the reality of how this feels inside the English NHS at the front line. And I hope we'll make some time for you to make sure there are questions and comments at the end. So a very, very warm welcome. So basically I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of how we got here and the journey that the English National Health Service has been on in terms of trying to improve itself. I'm going to say something about where we are today in terms of understanding what it is that we need to do. But for most of the time, I'm going to talk about the approach that we are now taking to driving improvement faster and harder and more at scale. And that's the main content, the idea of a change model that tries to drive that more quickly. But let me start by saying something about the journey. I'm sure many of you know about the English NHS. Goodness me, some of you work inside it. But it's been a pretty remarkable journey over the last 10 years. I guess those of you overseas, particularly in our European neighbours, 10 or 15 years ago, if you were looking across the Channel at England, I guess your impressions would have been of a service that was once a great service, a service that was very proud of being one of the first universal healthcare systems in the world. But I imagine that you looked at it as a service whose quality had worsened greatly. We had long waiting times, we had a poor record on infection control, some of our clinical outcomes didn't compare well to other parts of the world. It was perhaps a service that had been great, but was struggling. And then in the late 1990s, towards the end of the last century, we went through a pretty extraordinary renaissance in terms of the NHS. I think we decided as a country not to lose the NHS, but to seek to improve it. And the Blair government invested large amounts of money to try and bring the level of funding up to something like the European average, but in return asked us as an NHS family to lead significant quality improvement. So we went on a remarkable quality journey. You can see it in waiting times. 10 or 15 years ago, it was not rare for people for perhaps a hip replacement to wait 18 months for a hip replacement. That was an experience that happened routinely in the English NHS. Today, the median waiting time for care in the NHS from seeing your GP to having your operation is 6 weeks, not 18 months. That's a remarkable change. We more or less eliminated long waiting from the culture of the National Health Service. If you look at our track record on something like infection control, a journey led particularly by the nursing community, we moved from having a poor track record to doing well on infection control through relentless, rigorous approach to tough quality improvement, and the numbers continue to decline. And if you look at the comparative figures, this is an analysis that many of you will know. It's the Commonwealth Fund analysis. I've chosen the one from 2010, not 2011, because they present a comparison between countries in that year. And in their overall analysis in that year of the system studied, they ranked the UK, including Scotland and Wales, and Northern Ireland as the sort of second most effective system. Now, I am not claiming that we're the second best system in the world or the second best even of those countries. My point is that we went on a journey from absolutely being poor performing or struggling to one where we can hold our head up. Our performance seems to do reasonably well across many parts of the world. So it was congratulations, you win the £100 prize for the first phone to go off. It's not mine, is it? It was a nice ringtone anyway. Some of them were really, really embarrassing. It was very pleasant. So I hope you kind of see that journey. It was a remarkable journey. And at the end of that, because we tackled waiting times, we tackled infection control, we were really ambitious about what was possible, and we decided that having dealt with those issues, we would spread that journey to everything, and we would seek to tackle improvements in clinical care across the board. And we set out on a journey under the title High Quality Care for All, about spreading improvement everywhere. And optimism was high. We believed we could change the world, and we believed we could make the NHS perhaps the best system in the world. And right at that moment, I guess 2 to 3 years ago, right at the moment when we were ready to launch on that journey, the world economy went bust. And when the world economy went bang, it had a particularly bad effect on the UK economy because of our links to the finance sector. The government spent large amounts of money bailing out the banks. That money came from the public expenditure account, and that meant that there was very little money for public sector spending in the country. And so overnight, the environment changed for us. Overnight, we were faced with a problem that we'd never been faced before. We faced a major challenge around money. For us, the NHS in England was in a very unusual position. Compared to other parts of government spending, we were incredibly lucky. Our money has not been cut. So compared to colleagues in Spain or Greece or other parts of Europe who are going through extraordinary problems, for whom my heart goes out to you, our funding has not been cut. Our funding has been frozen, effectively, kept the same. Certainly for the next 3 years, and we think at a pretty low level for a much longer time beyond that. And in some ways, the government would like to say, fantastic, we have protected your funding, just carry on providing great healthcare and improving. But you know as well as I do that in healthcare, the money standing still doesn't mean you can carry on the same as you are. Because our population grows older and demand rises and we have new medical technologies, new treatments. Each year in healthcare, the economists, I guess, estimate that you have to have around 4 or 5% more money or more available resources just to be able to keep up with that change in healthcare. Healthcare pressures don't stop just because money stops. They keep going. And so with our money effectively flat and pressure growing, it opens up a gap. And the gap, we estimated about £20 billion by the end of 2014. And that's the point at which the Chief Executive of the NHS, David Nicholson, rang me. I was the Chief Executive of Strategic Health Authority and said, you know we've got this financial problem of £20 billion. I'd really like you to think about coming and tackling it. And I said, well, I'm very flattered, David. That's very kind of you. I'll certainly think about it. And those of you who know David well won't be surprised that he said, "You misunderstand, it's not a question." And so I took on this role 2.5 years ago of finding £20 billion of efficiencies and making everything better. That's my job. Thank you. It's worth it, thank you. Now first, it's very sweet of you to do that. I keep meeting people, and when they find that out, what they usually say is "good luck," and they say it in the way that I imagine in the First World War generals would have said it to their soldiers, as they weren't. And I first talked about this 2 years ago, and very few people expected me to be back in 2 years' time. So I'll tell you how we're doing, and people in England will reflect on it later. But the reason you applaud is because it's a pretty extraordinary problem, actually, to face. And most people don't believe it can be done. Most people in healthcare don't believe it is possible to increase quality, to meet new quality demands, whilst controlling financial resources. Most of us, in our hearts, deeply believe that what healthcare needs is more and more spending each year. Most of us have made our careers on fighting for more money each year to do better things. So it's very deep in our mindset and our hearts that we must have more money for healthcare. Now, using that same graph again, the line in that graph comparing us also showed, well, they say we were the most efficient system. I think we were the cheapest. It is different. But I simply make the point that it's not as though the English system was an expensive system. It's similar to many of yours in the room. Of course, it has more resources than many in the developing world. But it's not as though we were a system with an obvious larger expenditure than others. Now, I want to make the point very powerfully that for those of you thinking, poor old England, that this is our issue. We're facing a problem right now because of a short-term economic crisis. But it is a short-term version of the deep long-term problem that we all share, which is that around the world, each year, healthcare systems are consuming a larger and larger proportion of the wealth of their countries. So you and me, the people who love healthcare, who kind of are passionate about it, in the way that we run it, by using more and more of the resources of our country, you and I are killing healthcare. It is not possible to go on consuming greater and greater parts of the wealth of our countries. It is not possible to do it. You cannot spend 100% of the wealth of a country on its healthcare system. You cannot spend 50% or 30% of the wealth of a country on healthcare because we have other things to do. We have to provide housing and roads and schools and all the other things. It's not clear when it will break. It's not clear how much you spend when it will break. But it is clear that if we go on increasing healthcare spending each year in every country in the room by more than the wealth of the country increases, then at some point, either in our lives or in the lives of our children, it will not be possible in England to provide a universal healthcare system. It won't be possible in countries with insurance-based systems to have insurance that people can afford. By the way we run healthcare, we are destroying it for the future. We are a little like, I think, the energy companies of the 1970s were in thinking that they could go on making more and more profits by people consuming ever larger amounts of energy with no regard for the long-term impact. And at that time, in the 70s, there were kind of weird maverick people around who began to talk about sustainability of the planet, sustainability of energy. Now, today, those people are the norm. They are the mainstream. But then they were crazy. If you talk today, as I'm going to, about linking quality and cost in healthcare, people do see you as a little crazy. They applaud you when you say that you're trying to face this problem. But I would like to encourage us to think about becoming this generation of leaders who are determined to change the relationship between the cost and quality of healthcare, so that we can make it sustainable for ourselves and future generations. This is not an exaggeration. It is true that if we don't begin to make this change, the decisions we're making will mean that the healthcare systems that we value so much will not be available in the lifetimes of our children. So it's not my issue, it's our shared issue. And particularly in leading quality improvement, we need to be the people who make the link between that work of driving quality and driving efficiency. But it goes very much against how we have built our careers and how we have tried to think about healthcare. It goes deeply against what's in the heads and the hearts of most doctors and nurses who believe that better care needs more money, more doctors, more beds. It goes against the views of executives who believe that their job is to fight for money. So it's difficult. Now, actually, saving money is easy. It's easy to save money if all you're trying to do is save money. You just stop doing things. You stop recruiting nurses, you stop building new buildings, you let waiting times get longer. So one of our responses to our problem could have been to say, we just need to put to one side all our efforts on quality and just focus on saving the money. I'll talk to at the end about a worry about whether some of that is actually happening, but rather than that, we made a commitment. We made a national commitment, which is that we were going to tackle the financial problem by seeking to drive quality up. That's a pretty unusual thing to say. And that's the journey that we are trying to lead, that we're going to tackle our financial problem, not by abandoning quality, not by recognising that we just have to give up our journey of improvement, but by trying to use our journey of improvement to tackle quality and cost together. If you say something like that, it's all very well, it sounds great, but the question is, does it mean anything? Is it just some kind of brave statement? So if you say it, you have to be prepared to answer two questions. First of all, what would you do? What are the things that drive quality up and improve value, improve the economic situation? You have to answer the question, what would you do? And secondly, if you knew what to do, how would you do it? How would you make that happen? How would you use the techniques that we're all thinking about this week to drive that change? And so we started by trying to think about those two powerful questions. And we looked initially at what would you do? Now, this is a 2x2 matrix. You can't be an executive without a 2x2 matrix. You get thrown out. This is one in which quality is improving along here and cost is going up along here. And this is a diagram of my 25-year career. Okay, this is what I've spent my career doing. It's a bit depressing when you put it in this box, but this is what I've been doing. Honestly, 15 or 20 years ago, in the late 1980s and the early 1990s, I was here. And I think many of us were. As executives, as clinicians, we didn't really think about improving quality in an organised way. There was a small number of organisations around the world, Kaiser, I think of South Tees in England, people who were beginning to think about it. But pretty much we didn't think in an organised way about quality. We drifted along. And cost just drifted up year on year on year. That's my experience of that time 25 years ago. Since then, I've had two other experiences. When money has been around, I've spent it. I've used the money to do loads of good things, built hospitals, new diabetic services, we've had politicians cutting ribbons, great stuff. When money is around, we know how to spend it. I think there is no amount of money that you could throw at healthcare that we couldn't soak up. We're very, very good at it. And we do good things. It's not, it's not a terrible thing to say. When money's around, we knew how to spend it. And by the way, when money wasn't around, we just stopped doing stuff. So we've been in a stop-start cycle. Is there money around? Let's get hold of it, find it, make it happen, bring it to me, spend it. When I was a chief executive, that was my job for the hospital. I was the great hunter. My job was to wave goodbye to the doctors in the hospital, go out and find where the money was, fight battles, and bring it back in a big pot, tip it on the table, and say, go and do, and they would cheer and say how wonderful I was, because I'd found money for them. Sounds as though one or two people recognise that syndrome. The connection in our minds over that time between money and quality, you can see, is that it's linked. It's linked. It's very deep. I often reflect it's even linked at the level of language, certainly in England. So if you hear let's imagine there is a report published which says that cancer outcomes in Sweden are 10% better than in England. And the media will say this is terrible, and they will ask one of our top politicians to appear on the television to explain why this is a problem, and the interviewer will say, this is shocking, Minister, cancer outcomes in England are still poorer than in other countries, and the Minister will answer in terms of money. They will say, yes, it is disappointing, but we are going to spend another £50 million on cancer. It's linked, this idea of quality and money, at the level of language. The answer to a quality problem is a financial answer. So if you're going to say that you're going to drive quality up and tackle money, you have to answer the question, what is in the magic box? What is in the box that drives both quality up and improves value? And of course we went and we looked at the evidence, and I'll say some more about that in a moment. And what we found was that the magic box is full of stuff. And that not quite nearly every quality improvement creates the opportunity for value improvement. Because the reality of our healthcare system, which is full of people, very dedicated people working incredibly hard, is that it is absolutely full of waste, error, duplication, harm. Not because people are bad people or lazy, but it's the nature of our system, and it's probably the nature of most systems in the world. One way of thinking about the £20 billion problem is that it means we have to generate around 4% efficiency gain each year. 4%. Our system has far more than 4% waste, inefficiency, harm. If only we could get at it. A story this week, in the last few weeks, came to me from one of our great kind of clinical maverick leaders who's always pushing me hard on change, who was talking about his outpatient clinic and the fact that it's now computerised, which is great. It's got done electronically, but it takes 10 minutes to set the computer up, to get the computer up and working and set up for the clinic. And he'd been frustrated about this, and he talked to his colleagues, and they said, well, it's only 10 minutes, it's a bit frustrating. 10 minutes is more than the 4% that is needed efficiency for that morning. So if we solved the problem of his computer being available for him, it would solve the efficiency problem for that particular service for that day. So our service is full. Now, we looked quite hard at what we were going to target in those areas, and I'm going to put the list up. I'm not suggesting this is necessarily the same for you, and it's very, very headline. I'm really happy to provide more detail for anyone who wants it about the specific things we're focusing on. But these are the kind of the top issues that we think drive both quality up and help us release money. These are the figures that we're aiming for from each of these. Interestingly, the top one is the appropriateness of treatment. Inappropriate use, inappropriate hospitalisation, all those kind of things. I realise that's a very broad category, and I'm sure in questions you'll ask me something about it. Number 2, staff efficiency. It's quite an unpopular thing to talk about dedicated healthcare staff working inefficiently, but they do. I'm very proud to be the national leader of the NHS Institute, and our most successful set of products, which many of you use, is the Productive series. And they show typically that hard-working nurses, for example, are wasting around a quarter of their time, wasting it in the information that isn't correct, the patient meal that hasn't done properly, dealing with failure elsewhere in the system. So staff efficiency is a hard thing to say, but seems to be true. Some pretty boring things like equipment and supplies. I have an interesting relationship with the national big pharmaceutical companies who are very important to us, and the medical equipment companies who are very important to us, but I believe that they are laughing at us in healthcare in the way they sell to us. I think they sell us very, very expensive products in the wrong way, and together we need to tackle our supplier industry. It's the last supplier industry in the world that isn't really responding to the needs of its customers in efficiency. Things about use of medicine, which I know you know about. For us in England, we have a particular issue about the costs of pathology. And safety. Safety is a really, really deeply important quality issue. It's not a huge money saver, but it does also save money because the patient we harm, although most importantly that's a tragedy for that patient, is also an expensive patient. It's a shocking double waste of money, and one or two others. So it's only meant to provide an illustration. But my point is that the magic box of things where there is evidence that it drives both safety and efficiency is full. It turns out the problem is not what to do. We already know those things that do it. I should say one important thing, which is that quality improvement does not create efficiency. Quality improvement creates the chance to have efficiency, because you have to do other difficult things to have the efficiency. So an example would be an improvement in a redesign of a service. Let's imagine, again, say joint replacement, that reduced length of stay by 1 day on average for every patient. That's a great thing, great new service design, and you get to stay in hospital a day less. Some people say that's fantastic, that has saved a day in hospital costs £1,000. That's 500 patients we'd see, 500 times 1,000. That's £500,000 of efficiency. This is the same theory that my oldest daughter uses when she comes home having bought 3 pairs of shoes. And I say, why did you do that? And she said, well, there was £20 off each pair of shoes, so I've saved £60. And I say, that's fantastic. Can I have the £60, please? Yeah, you get it. Yeah. Particularly those of you who are fathers understand. In order to make that efficiency real, you have to take the savings from those efficiencies. You have to close the beds and redeploy the staff, and that's the tough bit. So quality improvement is fantastic. It generates the opportunity, the chance for efficiency. There's still difficult work to make the efficiency happen. For those of you who don't believe what I'm saying, and that's absolutely fine, there are plenty of people in England who don't believe what I'm saying, there are 1 or 2 very good academic studies. The one I particularly recommend is Overtveit from the Karolinska Institute, his meta-review of whether improving quality saves money. I've done this talk with John Overtveit in the audience, and I think I don't know if he's here today, but he's usually prepared to accept my conclusion. Overtveit's conclusion of a proper academic review of the evidence on does improving quality save money is yes. That's kind of what he says, yes. He says there's lots of good evidence, and it's quoted in the report. It's available in many places, including the Health Foundation's website. But there are 2 problems with the evidence base. One is that although it does have stuff that's of academic good standard, if your academic standard is gold standard clinical trials, then there's not much in the academic base that will satisfy you. So it's good evidence, but not at the standard of gold standard randomised clinical trials. And secondly, most of the studies are small scale. So trying to amplify them up to the level of a country or a region is quite a big ask. So there are one or two problems, but nevertheless it's true. And we've published all our evidence. And the reason, and it's there if you want to go and look at it. And the reason we published it was we wanted to have a national discussion about is it possible to do this thing. And our friends and our enemies, the think tanks, people like the King's Fund, the Health Foundation, politicians, the media, all crawled over this evidence. And despite our mindset, in general, people strongly agreed that yes, it is possible in principle for these reasons to drive both quality and efficiency together. So we think we've answered the question, what would you do? And we believe that anyone facing this problem can quite quickly answer the question, what are the things that you would do? It turns out to be many of the things you're doing already. The really difficult question is, how would you do it? How would you make this happen at the scale required, the size required, and at the pace required? Our experience of change is like many people in the room. We've had two models of change in the National Health Service. Model number one, which is kind of how we did our waiting time stuff, was a very top-down driven model of change. I would describe it as we will tell people what to do and we will beat them to death until they do it. It's a very successful way of driving change. It also makes people very unhappy. It gets rid of all clinical engagement. You lose of all that. So you can get stuff done, but at a very high price. And as soon as you stop pushing, the problem gets worse again. Model number two was a quality improvement method. And like many of you, we had fantastic experiences in using quality improvement methods to drive change. And we got fantastic clinical engagement. We got fantastic leadership, buy-in of staff. We made big gains. But our experience of quality improvement was, in my view, similar to the general problem facing the quality improvement movement here in this conference, which is that what we generated were islands of excellence. We generated individual examples of excellence, and we continually struggled to go from those to spreading them across the whole system. And we struggled to sustain them. And I am someone for whom quality improvement, learning those skills, was the transformational moment in my career. I am a huge, passionate fan and supporter of quality improvement. But I believe that we cannot go on believing that generating more and more good quality improvement projects is good enough. And that together we have to think about taking our work on quality improvement forward so that we don't have islands of excellence, we create an unstoppable drive for tackling our problems. I believe this, as the quality improvement community, is our fundamental challenge. And because of our financial problem, we were forced to think about how would we accelerate quality improvement as a method. And as a result, we've been adopting an approach that I'm going to talk to you about of linking quality improvement with 6 other components and trying to line up a range of approaches to driving this change to accelerate, to amplify our ability to change. We began by doing this unconsciously, and we've now been trying to describe it as a very concrete model of change that we want to make happen for the parts of the NHS that we run directly. So what I want to talk to you about, and this is the main purpose, is linking quality improvement method with a number of other things and lining them up to drive change at a faster pace and at a greater scale. And I strongly believe the examples I use will largely be about our country, but I believe this is applicable at every level of the system. Some of you will be doing much of this now. In fact, we were doing parts of this, but we weren't thinking in a focused way about lining this up together. So this is our approach to change. This is the point of this presentation. Number one is about starting with purpose. There's a repeated thing in this talk, which is I say things that sound obvious. Perhaps they are. but actually, we don't think about them hard enough, or at least we weren't thinking about them hard enough. Perhaps you are. But you need to start by talking about purpose. Change is, as you know, difficult. Particularly the changes we're facing in England are difficult. They involve people having to change things they care about the way their hospital works or the staff around them. And if you're going to do difficult change, there has to be purpose. Now, it's particularly interesting in healthcare. The story I always tell is that I live in a town called York. It's a very beautiful town. Let me do my bit for the York Tourist Board. If you're coming to England, you must visit York. Perhaps many of you have. It's a fantastically beautiful historic town. And it has two industries. One is tourism and the other is chocolate. It has a history of making chocolate. And I live next door to the guy who's in charge of quality improvement on the Kit Kat line. Kit Kat, people know what that is? Yeah, it's an international product. He's the guy, by the way, who eliminated the silver paper from the Kit Kat, which is disgraceful. It's terrible. Everybody hates it. But it apparently saved them millions and millions of pounds, and apparently makes it fresher as well. But, he and I sometimes compare notes on quality improvement. It's a very exciting place where I live. And he says it must be very easy for you leading quality improvement in healthcare, because you've got such wonderful staff who are so committed to the quality of patient care. Presumably, all you have to do is say, we need this change, and people do it. It's much harder for me. I have people who earn minimum wage working on a chocolate production line, and I have to convince them about quality improvement. And he's got a point, hasn't he? It's a very interesting problem that we have people who join healthcare with a burning passion to improve the lives of people, and yet somehow we knock it out of them. And we make them cynical and unhappy, and we make them see quality improvement as a threat to care. So we have a problem. And we've decided to deal with that by going back and speaking about purpose. Again, I think it's interesting in healthcare that purpose is implied. I mean, everybody thinks they joined healthcare to make a difference, and because of that we don't need to talk about it. But I think we should talk about it more, particularly when we're going through change. Because the purpose of our change is not to keep politicians happy or to hit some artificial target. It's to protect something very important in our society. And the way we've done that is by going back to a statement we have in the NHS Constitution. This is a document which describes, it's our deal with our country about what the NHS is for, and it starts with the most fantastic description of purpose, which, if you don't mind, I'm going to read to you. The NHS belongs to the people. It is there to improve our health and well-being, supporting us to keep mentally and physically well, to get better when we are ill, and when we cannot fully recover, to stay as well as we can to the end of our lives. It works at the limits of science, bringing the highest levels of human knowledge and skill to save lives and improve health. It touches our lives at times of basic human need, when care and compassion are what matter most. It's a remarkable statement of the deep purpose that you are, like us, responsible for in your society. If you come to our new offices, you'll see it all over the wall, actually, as we try and kind of drive for it. But in leading change, it means nothing if it's not connected to purpose. And so we've tried, and I encourage you, whatever your statement is, whatever matters, to go back and try and reconnect people with the purpose of the change in a very open way. Secondly, leadership. So I've been a healthcare leader, I've been a chief executive, I've met many great healthcare leaders, and we were the generation of leaders who took the NHS from being poor performing to doing well in the way I described. And we've had to wake up to a very difficult fact, which is that the skills that got us into our jobs are not good enough for the challenge we now face. And that we have to re-educate ourselves as leaders to be capable of doing the job. That's a difficult message. It's also true for senior clinical leaders, talented, hugely intelligent people. We need to stop thinking about the leadership of change as an amateur game. It's a professional sport. It requires a professional skill set. You cannot lead change effectively just because you're bright and experienced. It helps. It's a good thing. But you need to understand the skill set. You need to have the toolkit. And we need to work with all our community of leaders to give them the skills to do it. We've done an interesting thing, which we started by creating a program for our most senior leaders. Interestingly, we identified the top 1,000 leaders in the NHS. We're quite a big system, 1.4 million people. And we had a process of identifying the 1,000 most influential people. This was a controversial process. The person who was 1,001 in the list was not very happy. So it created some kind of anxiety. And with those people, we're intensively working with them as individuals to understand their skills, and in groups to work through what it means to lead this change process. It costs quite a lot of money. Well, it costs a few tens of millions. But it hasn't cost any new money. We were already spending large amounts of money on leadership development, but we were doing it in a completely random way. We would say to people, go and find a course to do to be a chief executive. Go and find a program that appeals to you. We had an amateur approach to developing people, not one that focused on the skills that we need for this program. And so we're now tackling that. So getting leaders trained with the skills that they need, including the most senior leaders, understanding that you need to be different to lead this journey. Number 2, spread. Spread of innovation. This is, as I say, this is the kind of deep problem of quality improvement. My apologies for those of you who've heard this story 100 times, but I'll tell my spy story because people always like it. As Sean Connery, as James Bond, the only real James Bond. So, I don't know why, it makes me feel better to say that. I don't know why. So the story is that I went on talking about leadership, I went on a leadership development program 7 years ago. It was a fantastic program. And the reason it was great was it was a mixture of leaders from different industries, from healthcare, from the energy industry, all sorts of things. And one of the people on the program was a spy, which was very, very exciting. All the women were all kind of... And all the men were all kind of... It's very exciting. He's having a drink there. He told us he was a spy when he got drunk. Which is true. And the story is, so the actual story is, this is a guy who'd been a proper spy working in China. And he explained that there's a problem being a spy, which is you've got quite a short kind of period when you're effective, because people figure out who you are, and they figure out that you're spying. So you're not actually... Your frontline career is quite short. And then you have to do something else. You can go and run other spies. You can be a spy master. It's even more exciting. Or you can do what he'd done and take those skills and work in other industries. And he had gone to work for the electronics industry for a major global electronics company. And he ran, this may be complex in the English, but he ran a counter-industrial espionage department. So he ran a department that stopped people stealing secrets. So he explained to me that he had a multi-million-pound department that stopped people stealing secrets of how to make electronic processes better. Now, at that time, I was a board member of the precursor to the NHS Institute. And I said, it's really interesting. We've got a multi-million-pound organisation trying to give secrets away. of how to make processes in healthcare better, and people don't want to know. One of my, it was the Modernisation Agency then, when we were asked how to improve the spread of ideas, my suggestion was that we should make them all secret. And it's very funny, and we laugh, and I'm laughing with you, but it is, of course, a complete disgrace. It's a completely disgraceful situation. That we are people who talk about that we put the needs of the patient above everything else, you know, that we would never let anything slip by us if we weren't improving quality, but we are unprepared to spread ideas from one place to another. When I was the chief executive of York Hospital, York was quite a successful hospital. It won some awards and provided good patient care. 20 kilometres away was a hospital called Harrogate Hospital, which was a fantastically successful hospital. The way we dealt with that was by describing Harrogate as a very successful small hospital. We would have rather poked our own eyes out with a stick than go and learn from Harrogate. What a disgrace. What a complete disgrace. We did get over it. Jason Leach and I, and many of you will know Jason, who's the fantastic clinical leader of safety and quality in Scotland, wonderful colleague. The current equivalent of that is, can England and Scotland learn from each other? A very successful small country. And I am determined that we won't have grown up till we show that we've learned from some of the fantastic work that Scotland, our neighbour, of course we want to learn from you in Denmark and Sweden and Norway and Switzerland, but we have to learn. And by the way, it's easy to change. The way you change it is you grow up and you get over it. And you decide that you're going to learn. So it's great that you learn today in Paris. It's fantastic. Get all the learning you can. But the way you really signal it is by going home and learning from your neighbours. We've also decided in England to get more serious about spread and implementing some change. Our approach to spread has largely been one of creating great conferences and good practice websites and hoping that people will take it up. And they do, but it's very, very slow. And so, by all means, download this report from the web. On a number of key innovations for healthcare, we've decided as a country we are going to implement them across the country. You will not be able to get paid if your money for your hospital or your services if you are not showing how you are implementing this change. It's not right for everything, because you would kill some of the engagement. But we're trying to move from a very, very passive form of spread to one where we're being much clearer about those things that need to happen. So we have to tackle spread. Number 3, I don't think is a problem in this audience, which is you have to have a method. I think you all agree with that. You have to have an improvement method. Personally, I'm not that worried about what the method is. I think Lean, the IHI improvement model, the European model, the Danish model, they all have common roots and they're all good models. But once you've got a model, you should use it as the game plan and you should use it to drive the change. You have to have a game plan and it has to be your quality improvement method. And by that I mean people should be trained in it, they should understand it properly, you should have some people who are expert, everybody should understand it, the leaders should believe in it, but have a method and use it. I'm not spending long on that because my assumption is because you're here, you kind of agree with that. Here's a more difficult one for people in this room, which is rigor on delivery. I talked earlier about these 2 improvement models, a quality improvement model and what we would call a performance management model, in which we were really clear what needed to happen. One of the things I am trying to do in the way we drive for this change in England is to say that we should have the same discipline that we had when we were driving waiting time in the work that we're doing, say, on quality improvement in safety. Some great colleagues in quality improvement are very uncomfortable with that. Quality improvement comes from starting with engaging people, inspiring them about the change, making them feel ownership. And I strongly agree with all those things. And when you do that, you get the early implementation right, and you get some take-up from the next 20 or 30%, and gradually it will spread. But you will end up with a group of people who are still not making that change happen. And in my view, on the important changes at that point, we should say, I'm sorry, but it does need to happen everywhere and on the date that we said. You have to have discipline to follow through and make it happen. An example for me is the surgical checklist. It's an example that many of you will be familiar with. It has been wonderful that starting with an equality improvement approach, we've got many great surgical leaders inspired about using the checklist to improve safety and, by the way, efficiency, and it's spreading through the community. We can also see a number of surgical teams who say either they are not implementing it, or, well, we've been told to implement it, so we'll say we're doing it, but we'll do it in a way that is dismissive of it, that's full of contempt. They'll stand in theatre and say, we've been told by someone we've got to do this stupid checklist, so we'll do it. And in my view, for something that is shown to have a benefit for safety in the way the checklist has, we have to have the discipline to say that cannot happen and follow through and deliver on that. And I'll say one or two things about how that is going to happen. But these things are in tension. I'll just say on this sort of not doing the checklist thing. I've been on a lot of planes in the last few days, and I was wondering if you got on a plane and the captain came on and said, oh, hello, I'm Captain Johnson, morning everyone. Just so you know, I'm the pilot who doesn't believe in checklists. But we allow that to happen in our hospitals. This idea about discipline on delivery and engagement are in tension. They're not easy to bring together. And you have to be careful that by focusing too much on engagement, you haven't got the discipline, or by focusing too much on the discipline, you are killing the engagement. It's a complicated problem. But I think as improvers, again, and I'm sorry if you find the language rude, I am one of you. I am going through the same journey as you are. I believe that we need to grow up a little bit about improvement and understand that when we say something matters and makes a difference for patients, we have to follow through to the end point of delivery. The next component of the model is transparent measurement. Now, you are all good quality improvers, that's why you're here, so you all know that you can't do quality improvement without good measurement. Again, I'm going to take that as accepted by this audience, that you have to have good measurement, statistical process control, those kind of things. I also strongly believe that we should be making more and more of that information transparently available to our patients, and that is a strong push in our country. The data about safety does not belong to us. The data about outcomes for care does not belong to us. It belongs to the community we serve. And we should be liberating that data and using it as a lever. I understand that is difficult. The data are quite complicated. They take some interpretation. But I think that we should understand that, by and large, the people we serve, the public, are very capable of dealing with that information and, in my view, have a right to have it. I used to say that there weren't many benefits to working in the National Health Service, but one benefit was that you knew which doctor you would allow to treat your child. Because we kind of know what the quality distribution of doctors and nurses is. We think it's okay for us to know it, but not for someone called the public to know it. And I don't think that's right. So firstly, I think there is an ethical case. Secondly, I think it's a powerful driver for change. I think the medical community, in a particular scientific community, is very driven by comparative data, and will use it as a lever for change. The early experience of the cardiothoracic surgeons, who initially were very nervous about publishing data and now see it as an essential tool for comparing and improving practice, I think is powerful for us. So secondly, it's a big driver. And thirdly, I think it is fueling a process of patients having more power and more expectation about that care. And I think that's a difficult process for us. It will put us as healthcare leaders under pressure, but it's the right pressure. And so by liberating information, we gradually create more patient pressure for change. Every time you decide to release information, take the example of safety, it's a painful process. We've just been doing some work, and Jane Cummins, the chief nurse for England, is in the room, has been powerful support for this on safety, about the amount of harm. And you won't be surprised to know that when we measure all sorts of different harms, only around 80% of patients in England have a completely harm-free journey. It's a typical international statistic. When we begin talking to the public about that, they are at first, they are horrified. They say, what do you mean only 80% of people are harm-free? We'd assumed it was 99.99%. So it always is a difficult thing to do at first. But then the conversation moves to people developing their understanding and developing that you're on a journey of improvement. So it seems to us to be always worth doing, even though it's difficult at first. So I would encourage you to not just have the measurement, but within your organisation and within the communities you serve, to make it transparent. Nearly there. System drivers. Our experience was that we had work on quality improvement going on, but somewhere else we'd have things that drove the system, and I mean money, and I mean rewards for performance, that weren't lined up properly. The best example is that we've been doing lots of work to try and generate more care for people with chronic diseases out of hospital. Lots of quality improvement work for that. But our system for paying hospital pays you for care in hospital. They were completely lined up in the wrong way. Does that make sense to people? And guess what? You would do your improvement work, which would great results, but you couldn't get it to bed because actually the hospital would lose money if it implemented the improvement. We had a bad alignment between the system driver, the way the money flowed in the system, and the quality improvement intent. And so we've been working to try and get a better alignment. The way I would describe it is that too often the quality improvement is like cosmetic surgery, plastic surgery, and the system drivers, the money, the culture, they're like the DNA. And if they're not lined up, then the DNA will win. And you'll do your improvement projects and you'll get your benefits, but the DNA, the money and the culture will pull the results back to where they were. Now you can carry on doing your improvement over and over again. That's like doing dozens of plastic surgery operations. You have seen the photographs of those Hollywood people that have had lots of facelifts. They're not pretty. So you have to start changing the DNA. So our way of doing that is to change the rules about how money flows. And we've started to do that in terms of moving away from a system that pays you every time you see a patient. We're currently in the middle of that process, but we want to end up, and some of you have this already, so you have a system that pays you for managing the outcomes of that patient. And actually, if you admitted them to hospital lots of times, you'd probably lose money. If you provided great out-of-hospital care, you'd make money. So lining up the system incentives. And although I talk about this at a national level, I think you have many of those levers in your control at every level of your system. Not just how money moves around, say, your hospital or clinic, but think about who gets promoted, who gets rewarded, all those kind of incentives in the system, and how you line them up to be the same as your improvement project. And the last element in the model is engagement to mobilise effort. If you'd have seen me do a version of this presentation 2 years ago, I'd have talked about communication. And we've now moved on to talking much more about engagement. Communication is very important. This connection between the work and the purpose is about the way in which we tell the story. There are some things about communication that we have learned that are important. First of all, is that communication is a contact sport. You have to touch the people. You have to touch people. You can send newsletters and put websites out, and we do all that. But pretty much on difficult change, you have to be in the room, face to face with people, talking, wrestling, arguing, agreeing about the change. It's highly demanding in terms of investment of time. We've spent literally thousands and thousands of hours in many settings, and we'll continue to, trying to have the discussion about leading this difficult change for the country. That's the first lesson. It's a contact sport. Secondly, there are techniques about the way you communicate that make it more powerful. So we've been using a technique called public narrative, and again, there are some colleagues in the room who are experts in this, which are about ways of framing stories about change that are more powerful. They include talking about yourself. You've heard me do some of that today and why you think it's important. They include talking about us as a collective group, and you've heard me try and engage in that way to drive change. And they include talking about the moment of change now and why this is an important change. So there are some specific techniques and skill sets around communication. Interestingly, for example, I think that many of the quality improvement methods we have, although they talk about engagement, have not had enough specific tools in about the engagement process, and we are developing some of those. So you have to have a huge amount of your time to telling the story. If you are the leader of change, and many of you will be, you will have to tell that story hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. First of all, people aren't psychic. They don't get it unless you say it. And secondly, people are busy and they have lots of information and they don't hear it the first time. You have to tell the story over and over again. The main risk for you is that you get bored telling the story over and over again, and so you change it so that it's more interesting for you. And then people think everything's changed. So you have to relentlessly, in a way that hopefully is interesting, tell the story over and over again. I'm just going to say a few final things about the leadership point, and then we're nearly at questions. I've got one or two concluding remarks, because I was making the point about the whole community of leaders, but I want to say a couple of things about us as individuals and the particular things that we need to do in leading this change, leading this quality improvement and linking it with value. The first thing I want to say is about how necessary it is that you remain sorry. You remain that's a good one. You remain you've got a choice, haven't you? And that's the right choice. You can ignore it and look around thinking, whose phone is that? Or you can go and answer it. I think that's the right choice. You have to not accept middle performance, mediocre performance. When you are leading for quality improvement, you have to set a high ambition for performance. And yet, there are many pressures on you to accept that performance that's in the middle is okay. This is the graph that's produced every year by a company called Dr. Foster of the distribution of hospital mortality in England. You'll have a version of this in your own country. And they publish the name of every single hospital and what its score is. And what happens on the day that they publish this data is that these people here, the best performers, they have a party. They have a big celebration. These people down the bottom, the worst performers, they have a terrible time. They have the media, television cameras saying, why are patients dying? It's awful, obviously. And these people here, they breathe a sigh of relief. That's the response. When I started at York Hospital, not these figures, but some other figures were published about where we sat in a national distribution, and one of my very good colleagues came in to me and said, we've got the figures, and he showed them to me, and he said, it's good news, we're in the middle. Turns out, by the way, on death rates, it's not really the right thing to have a party just because you're viewing slightly fewer people than other people. And it's absolutely not the right thing to breathe a sigh of relief because you're in the middle of the number of people who are being killed by your healthcare system. And when you're the improvement leader, that's what you have to say. So if you're the improvement leader and you've come out here, you have to name it. Now, what happens is people don't like it. If you say to people, gosh, you know, we're only here, but I know we've had a really tough year. We didn't have the staffing we needed and our budget was cut. So, you know, hey, it's not ideal, but this is pretty good. If you say that, people will love you. They'll say, Jim really understands what it's like to be on the front line. He really understands the pressures. And people will think you're great. But you're not leading quality improvement. If you're in the same place and you say, you know, I know what a tough year we've had. We had that budget cut, but we still can't be happy with this number. That's still not right. We still have to push to be excellent. People will say, Jim doesn't understand the pressures of the front line. He is unrealistic. I have been accused of being a bully. Seriously accused of being a bully for saying that we had to do those things. But I think that's what it means to be a leader of quality improvement. If you accept average performance, then we should have no surprise that is all we get. We have to set a high bar. I secondly want to say something about leading difficult people, and we touched on this earlier to some extent. And again, it's simply to say that we're very lucky in that most people working in healthcare are fantastic. They're exciting and intelligent and committed. There are some difficult people, and even most of those are difficult because they care so much. But there are a small number of very difficult people who use the fact that they're unhappy or angry to block and disrupt change. And in the past, in England, we've kind of allowed those people to get away with it. And I think we need to move to a world where we don't. And again, it is tough. It's difficult to tackle those people. We were sat around the management board table, so the most senior leaders in the NHS, and I had to say to a colleague, I'm sorry, but I'm not happy with the performance on a safety issue in your patch. And their response, this is a wonderful colleague, was to tell me to get off their turf. It's difficult dealing with these things. But if we care about being improvement leaders, we have to. And finally, I want to say something about creating the culture of improvement. This is a photograph of the hospital I used to run. It was about 3 o'clock in the morning, and the telephone went, and it was the hospital on-call system, and they said, we're sorry to disturb you at 3 in the morning, Mr. Easton, but the hospital is on fire. We didn't know if you wanted to come in. I said I thought I would. A guy who was known to us with significant drug and alcohol problems had arrived in our emergency department, quite unwell with an overdose. We admitted him to hospital for observation. He woke up in the night pretty psychotic, found the linen store and set fire to it. There was a mother and an unwell mother and a young baby in that bed. He set fire to it burnt out the whole of the 3rd floor of the hospital. We evacuated 120 frail patients in the middle of the night. The last patient was evacuated by 2 very junior nurses through lots of smoke, a great personal risk. Everybody was safe at the end of this. And the guy at this point had found a knife and was running around threatening people and was tackled by a young doctor and a young nurse, and so on. And it was a very, very frightening thing. Next morning I was walking around. Hospital was obviously under lots of problems, and I was walking around as the chief executive giving instructions about what we needed to do, and they did not need me there at all. Everything I asked to do had already been done. We created effectively 3 more wards that morning. It used to take us a year to create a ward. That morning we created 3. We did a whole day's work in half a day. People were extraordinary. You never have to worry how healthcare workers are going to be in a crisis. In a crisis, healthcare workers are fantastic. Absolutely extraordinary. We get a great buzz from crisis, whether it's a fire or a big medical problem. We love crisis. We love it so much that if we haven't got one, we'll make one. And one of the big problems with quality improvement is that what it creates is calm, ordered care. It creates routine. It creates normal routine. It doesn't create rescue, excitement, crisis, failure, buzz. It creates calm, ordered care. And our staff, who are turned on by rescue, don't give value to it. And we as leaders don't give value to it. After that event, we applied for and got, for the 4 staff I talked about, National Bravery Awards. They were extraordinary. And we had a big ceremony in the reception of the hospital where we had a celebrity giving these National Bravery Awards. And at the end of it, someone said to me, that was fantastic, it was wonderful. I said, but what have we done for the people who've just run the 3rd month in a row with no infection control, or just delivered 6 months of ordered care? Answer, nothing. We were rewarding crisis, we weren't rewarding routine, ordered care. And one of the things as leaders we need to learn how to do is to give reward to the routine, to make people understand that that is how care should be. Like many of you, I've been a patient, I've been seriously ill. When you are horizontal, that's what you want. You want ordered care. When I was seriously ill, the thing I valued most was the nurse who said to me every day, Jim, this is where you are on the pathway. This is what we expect to happen today. And I'll be seeing you again at 2 o'clock to talk about these results. It was calm, it was ordered, it was routine, and I wanted it more than anything in the world. So giving value to the routine. So just a few things about the personal stuff. So that's our story. A journey of moving from improving a healthcare system to suddenly being challenged by this economic problem. And in response to that, trying to create an approach that I commend to you in terms of thinking about how it applies to you. I'll finish by just saying a few things about where we are in terms of results. I'll ignore that. Because you will be thinking, well, so what? Well, and I'll try and be completely open about this. So, first of all, on the money, we're in a strange position of doing, as a country, this isn't true in every place, slightly better than we thought. Over the last 2 years, independently audited, it looks as though we've delivered over £9 billion of efficiency. We've never done that before. It's not true to say that that's happening well in every place. It's absolutely not true to say that. So we've got, I think, about a third of the country doing that really well, exactly in the way we would want. About a third kind of a mixture, and we have about a third where it's a real struggle, and we are seeing some of the behaviour of just stopping things. So it's a mixed picture, but remarkable nevertheless, and tough for everybody. We're holding on to our current quality markers. Our infection control rates continue to go down, our waiting times continue to stay, our clinical outcomes continue to improve, and interestingly, for the first time ever, this is quite a poor picture, I'm sorry, we've seen for the first time ever a reduction in the number of emergency patients presenting at hospitals. Far too early to suggest that that is a trend, but it's interesting that for the first time ever, as a country, it's gone down. Again, that's not true in every place. So at one level, that's a great sort of success. Underneath that, we're very anxious that we're making good progress on the short-term measures, but not enough progress on the deeper change. So I want to be completely straightforward with you about it. But actually, 2 years in, £9 billion of efficiencies, and as we sit here today, holding on to or improving our efficiency measures, our quality measures, with a range of actual performance around the country, is probably better than we'd hoped. It's as well that that's the case, because the Chancellor has just published his financial outlook for the next 10 years, and it's not going to get any better. And we're just thinking about how we generate new energy for that change. So I hope that's been of use to you. I would finish where I started, which is that the purpose of quality improvement has never been greater. which is that we face a huge shared challenge of can we sustain our healthcare systems. You might be living in a healthcare system that's had its budget cut, or one like us where there's pressure, or one like many I meet where you're still getting 4 or 5% increase in resources each year, and even that feels tough. But we have to learn to use quality improvement at greater scale, with greater focus and greater pace, to be the tool that allows us not just to improve quality today, but to produce a sustainable healthcare system for the future of our countries. And we don't get a choice about it. We are the generation of leaders who it falls on to do that. And I'm very excited about the chance of responding to that challenge. Thank you very much indeed for listening. I'm really happy we've got a little bit of time. I've spoken slightly longer than I thought to take some questions. There are 1 or 2 microphones. I realise that some colleagues will go at this point. I'm emotionally able to cope with that. So. Do you mind using the microphone? It's just so they're just on the platform there. Thanks very much. Thank you for asking a question.
Hello, I'm Rosa Sunol from Spain.
Hi.
Coming from a country
Tough world.
that has decreased 10% the budget of the healthcare in 1 year, which means 14% because the 4% of the growth, the normal growth.
Absolutely.
But I don't want to talk about that. I just wanted to talk about the drivers. Have you realized that, just directly speaking, the problem is that you have to merge hospitals and send 3-4% of the workforce out every year, just to put the things in the direct way. So what happens, whatever percentage you have, I mean in Spain is 14, but you have 3-4%, what happens is that the group that goes out used to be the group that helps you in the quality systems. Young people, people committed, never the older chiefs of departments don't having a productive work. So have you considered the possibility about what will happen with the drivers of these people?
Yeah, great, fantastic points. And we look at the challenge facing colleagues in Spain and realise that we're lucky by comparison. Well, first of all, I strongly agree that you have to get real about what it means for numbers and people. So at our level of 4%, we think that includes a slight reduction in nursing staff across our country, for example. And I've spent many hours with politicians trying to explain that story, and many hours with my colleagues in national trade unions for nursing talking about how that should happen. I have to say I haven't yet seen what you describe, although I completely understand it in the sense of losing the wrong people. And so I'm not entirely sure of the detail of my facts here, but certainly in the data I've seen, we've been encouraged. First of all, we've been getting rid of a lot of administrative staff rather than frontline staff. We've been trying to protect our investment in quality and in leadership development. So we've taken a decision to probably spend more on those things during this period. And actually, the amounts are relatively small. They're about 100 million for the country. And I haven't seen anything that shows a drain away of kind of those young people. But it will force me to go back and look. The fear we've had, one of the issues for us is that because we've also been attacking people's pensions, that has encouraged many older people to go because they protect their pension by going. So that may affect the balance, but it's a very powerful reminder of something we should be conscious of. Thank you.
Jim, hi. Tom Downs, Clinical Lead for Quality Improvement in Sheffield.
Hi, Tom.
Great presentation. I really enjoyed it. Education. Education's the best predictor of life expectancy. I was a doctor for 16 years before I started to understand about quality improvement. You live in York. When I visited a small ball bearing company in Barnsley, the trainee in that company had 2 jobs. He had his own job and he had improving his job. I see our medical students, our nursing students and our therapists coming out of their training not with that view that they have 2 jobs. What is your view about education in this for building the capability, with the challenge that the lag period for that paying off doesn't fit with the QUIP timetable?
Yeah, these are great questions, Tom. Thank you. So I think one of our weaknesses is that because we have a short-term problem, we're focused on the short-term results more than we are on the long-term issues. And because we now know this is a long-term problem, we're back paying attention to some of those things about undergraduate education and postgraduate education, even though they have a 10, 15, 20-year lead-in time. I've got personal experience of trying to introduce quality improvement into the medical training of undergraduate doctors, and it was quite a salutary experience. This was when the new Hull York Medical School was formed, and we could shape the curriculum. And because of my passion for this work, we got it on the curriculum. What we didn't do was make it part of their assessed examination scores. And my learning was that when you're someone training to be a doctor, only one thing matters. Have I got enough knowledge in my head on the day of the exam to pass the exam? And because we didn't test it in the examinations, it was seen as a trivial and actually a distraction from the real work of being a doctor. On the other hand, I am seeing many, and there are some actually in the room, young doctors and other professionals who are being given a limited scale opportunity to get these skills early, through some of the kind of mentorship programs, and those people are incredibly powerful for change. My fear is that we'll leave them isolated and they'll be seen as aliens in their own culture, and the prevailing culture will beat it out of them. So we're sort of starting again. It's not difficult to do technically to put these things into the curriculum, but if we're serious about it, it's not something to do in addition to becoming a doctor or a nurse. It's what it means to be a doctor or a nurse.
You talk very powerfully about the need for mandation at times. The surgical safety checklist has been a fantastic example of that. How far are we from a similar mandation for this into education, do you feel?
I don't know is the answer to that, but we've got this creation of this, so this is a slightly English conversation, we've got the creation of Health Education England, and I'm determined to work with those quite directly about how we should be seeking to use that money. And Jane, again, who's in the room, I know will be also wanting to lead that conversation. Anyone else? Hi, sorry, it's quite difficult for me to see, I apologise.
Yeah, Shams Khan, I'm one of the young doctors from Wigan Infirmary. I just wondered about the sort of rolling out the training and improvement techniques. I've recently had some myself, and thinking about back to what you were saying about learning from other or possibly smaller organisations, I wondered if it was worth looking at the Resus Council and how 15, 20 years ago they rolled out resus training throughout all the hospitals and transformed doctors' nurses' ability to resuscitate patients. And I almost see improvement techniques as a sort of mini advanced life support, if you like. You could teach it 1 or 2 days. People would flock to teach it free of charge. There'd be financial savings. And I wonder what you thought about a sort of council of improvement faculty.
Well, fantastic. Let's talk offline about whether that's possible. What's interesting to me, sorry, that's a great idea. Let's get hold of it together and see if we can make use of it. What's interesting to me is that when you talk to people about change that they really valued, it often is kind of pushed in that way. But when you suggest pushing it in that way, it collides with a culture that's about independence of practice. And I think we've got quite a complicated problem to solve about in quality improvement, about the relationship between independence of practice and doing some things the same way all the time. And it becomes a debate like a cartoon, you know, like Tom and Jerry hitting each other about should we be completely independent or are we going to have everything mandated? Well, of course, that's a nonsense. But there are things that we should spread in a much more direct way using the tools you describe because they make a difference for our patients. It's unethical not to do it. But your description is a really good example of something that pulls off the trick of both being very organised and disciplined, but also having a sense of engagement and pull about it rather than just push. So let's find a way to talk about it. It's a great suggestion. Thank you. Hi. Sorry.
Hi.
Hi Jim, Fiona Moss, London Deanery. I just really wanted to pick up the point about doctors in training programmes. I'm absolutely bowled over by the numbers of residents, doctors in training programme, junior doctors are here presenting stuff.
Fantastic.
And they get it.
Yeah.
And I think actually they're the best kept secret in the NHS.
Yeah.
Any other industry would have them next to the medical director's or chief executive's office. And when they do that, they not only improve quality, they save money. And I just think we've got to get out of the way we do things and to put it in a system that actually makes a difference and makes sense now. And I just think there's a huge amount that we could do. And I think they're out there, they're about to get it big time.
Right.
And I just think that we, some as leaders, need to enable them and empower them, because I think they seriously could unlock a huge amount for us.
It's a great point, and it makes the lie of what I said, doesn't it, of you have to kind of wait 15 years for them to filter through. That was a very traditional response on my part.
We don't wait for curriculums because they are just ossified. I mean, even with trying to change them, it's a very difficult way to do it. It's one of these things easier to ask forgiveness than permission.
Yeah.
Well,
again, let's find a way of creating revolution. Hi, and then I'll come to there.
I was here first.
Oh, sorry.
After you, sir.
I know.
We're quality improvers, we're nice people.
I know him and I've paid him before, so he can wait.
Okay. Thank you. I'm from Auckland, New Zealand, and I have a problem. And I just wonder whether you have a similar problem with the changes that you are in the process of developing. Now, one of the major obstructions to change for us is actually managing the unions. And I just wonder whether this is relevant in your context, and if there's any advice you can give me as to how we might overcome the reluctance by many to change the status quo.
It's a challenge for us too. I think one of my pieces of learning about the differences between countries, because there's so much in common actually between countries in healthcare, is that relationships between trade unions, professional bodies does differ quite a lot. So I certainly don't understand the subtleties of how it works for you guys. We are helped, of course, by having a national crisis. So it helped us initially to do tough things and kind of get away with it with trade union colleagues. We've been investing a huge amount of time in talking repeatedly to them in a very open way about the numbers, how they work, what this means, and trying to get involvement. We think we've been successful in getting support in principle that this sort of change needs to happen, but it's still very, very hairy and difficult when it turns into practice. The most interesting example I would quote, and I think I quote this as a good example, but it's not easy, is our relationship with the Royal College of Nursing, who in response to this challenge and us talking to them and their own members being very worried, started a national campaign called Frontline First. It's worth going onto their website and looking at the material, the videos they present. And it's very interesting. So Frontline First is a campaign that says the NHS needs to solve a problem of efficiency. That's a really good thing for it to say. And we got that by just going over and over and over again. And we support things that will drive for that and improve quality, but we'll fight against things that don't. And so the debate becomes about, are the things that are happening the right things or not? And we review some of that together, and we agree together that some things are okay to do. We agree that some things are happening in the NHS which are not about quality, and we should look at those, where people are just taking nurses off the rota without any care for quality. And we disagree about some things which I and my colleagues see as good things for improvement and they don't. So it's a painful discussion. But it's very open, and it's helped by being open about the numbers, but it sometimes gets difficult and heated. We try together to do the deal about how many people we think we should keep in nursing or keep in the other professions, where the numbers will go, and retraining people to do other jobs. All of the heat in that discussion is about numbers, whereas actually we could adjust the numbers without really affecting people that much. The real issue is change, and the real fighting is against individual change, and so we need to put more effort on that. So it's a completely unhelpful answer to you, except that A, yes, we share it, B, we found that being completely straightforward about all the numbers is the only way to be, and be open to talking over and over again about individual examples and trying to do the deal on change. Interestingly, I think trade union colleagues are good colleagues. Their job is to defend the interests of their members. They know in the English context that defending the interests of their members cannot be from just opposing everything, because the numbers don't work. And so there is a way of getting under how do we protect the interest of most of your members while going through this change. And at the end of all that, there are things where we say, we're just going to push this through and we know you'll oppose it. And we work currently on Whitehall, and we've had marches down the street, and there will be more, because that's part of the price of change.
Thank you.
Kevin.
Hi, Jim. Thanks. Kevin Stewart, Royal College of Physicians, London. First of all, Jim, the best talk I've heard at this meeting by far, so thank you for that. And I'm not just saying that.
And I don't pay you anymore.
I'm not just saying that because you once paid my wages, although I don't think they were quite enough.
A point you made.
Okay, so leading on from the last point, one of the biggest barriers to change in our healthcare system and all healthcare systems is the reluctance of senior doctors to change. Can you say something about how we might achieve that? That was the easy question last.
Yeah. Well, I think I've got two responses. Firstly, one is about seeing doctors as no different to anybody else, and the second is about seeing doctors as very different. So in terms of seeing doctors as no different, I don't think, I mean, I'm a person who uses generalisations all the time, but I don't think it's right to say senior doctors are opposed to change, because most of our great quality improvement programmes are led by great senior doctors who are leaders of change. And so the issue is the spread of that through their community. And as I say, I think the challenge for us is that we've shown through colleagues like you and many others that you can get to the first 10% and the next 30% and so on. But there's then a point where we have to take a tough decision that is going to happen for the rest, and there are consequences. And then going back to the trade union question, that comes with difficult consequences about people telling you you're evil and bad and all that kind of stuff. So I think connecting up great senior leadership at the beginning to get people on board with a change and get a change in culture, with a willingness to take tough action at the end for those people who won't comply. And I think you can be smart about that. So, for example, I'm sorry to use the example again, take the surgical checklist. Take the people who won't comply. I think what we should be doing is making those people uninsurable as surgeons. You know, by saying that you can't get talking to their defence union, saying we now regard, what's the phrase in the English law? Acceptable normal practice, or whatever it is. You can't get in. That's that we now regard use of the checklist properly as acceptable normal practice, and it's not a defence against negligence if you didn't use it. So we think there are smart things you can do about that, but we should follow through. So in that way, that's no different to any other group of staff. I do think there's a really, it's really hard being a senior doctor right now, because you were trained to have one set of beliefs about what it meant to be a doctor, status, independence of practice. And the science of medicine has changed that, and the social situation has changed that. So you end up having to have a different set of expectations at the end about a different balance between standardised practice, a different relationship with your patients, a different relationship with the management of the service. So we're watching quite a deep existential change going on in what it means to be a doctor from the beginning of those careers to the end. And I think we should be sympathetic about that and try and explain and talk about it. It must be hard. And by the way, it's the same for my community who were taught that they were going to run everything and now need to give that leadership to other people. And this journey forces you to change your basic understanding of what it meant to do your job, and that's not an easy process. And it speaks to things that we don't do very well about coaching, about supporting people through change. Doctors are terrible about having those conversations with each other and as a profession, and we should be doing stuff we're not doing to help people through what is quite a profound change of what I signed up to be as a doctor is not what I'm going to end up being as a doctor. Well, thank you very... Oh, no, we'll do one more. People can go. But...
I'll do it very quickly. I'm Anders Molnar. I'm from Denmark.
Hi,
Thank you for a lovely presentation. I'm wondering, given that the short timeline before you have to actually deliver some results, does that mean that you have kind of down-prioritized some of the more long-term preventive measures?
That's a great question. I wish I could say that you're wrong, but you're right. We started this off with a view that we'd have a focus on long-term prevention as well, and because of the pressure on us, we've focused more on the short term. And it's what I said, right now, if you asked how we're doing better than expected, but we think underneath that we've lost progress on some of the longer-term goals, and we think that will become a problem for us in the next year or two. So we're having to return to that. So keeping the balance of short-term and long-term has been something we thought we'd got right, but if you asked us today, we think we've got too dragged into the short term. We think there's a general issue about needing to know more about great work on prevention because the 50-year future of healthcare demands a completely different approach. Well, thank you so much for being so patient listening. It's a great pleasure.